Hey man, how are you? Good. Are we working? Hey man. All right, should we start? Hi everyone, good to see you all. Good to be back here in Moscow. I have the pleasure today of introducing the strategy office. I want to caveat this by sort of reminding everyone that the strategy office has only been going for about 2 weeks. So this is very high level, very introductory. There's not a lot of strategies here yet. Certainly not a lot of answers, but I want to take the opportunity just to explain more or less why we're setting up a strategy office, what the intention of the strategy office is, and explain a bit about what we plan to focus on and how plans to work. So very introductory, very high level. It's not going to be particularly enlightening, but bear with me and I'm happy to answer a lot more questions at the end. So first wanted to talk a little bit about what exactly strategy is, what a strategy office normally does, and provide a bit of context for what we're setting out to do. Always helps to start with a definition. This one you can Google. It's the thing that turns straight up. But strategy is defined as two things. It's a plan of action designed to achieve a long-term sort of goal, objective, or an aim. And very much the focus of what we're trying to do with the strategy office is think about how we start to think longer term and what we're trying to do, how we build better plans to sort of achieve our objectives and goals as a company. Now there's a second definition from a strategy standpoint which relates a lot more to how the military thinks about it, which is the art of planning, directing battles and kind of military conquests and kind of war zones. So it's somewhat relevant, and I'll come back to it, but I do want to avoid a lot of the military connotations of strategy. So typically, and this is an interesting graphic from Boston Consulting Group that outlines normally what a chief strategy officer is in charge of, what the strategy office function typically does in a whole range of organizations. So you can see that there's this data is compiled across 50 sort of major companies, just to give you a flavour of typically what responsibilities sort of look like. But you can see it's broadly divided into 3 sections. The first is on actually developing strategies, and you can see from the graphs this is, I guess, proportionally what roles and responsibilities would be constituted under that. So you can see a lot of the focus is on identifying where opportunities are for growth. The process of actually developing strategic plans, as you would imagine, kind of around those growth opportunities. Looking at long-term trends, competitive intelligence, a lot of market research and other kinds of aspects. There's a second component which is about how you actually allocate resources, and in a military context that would be your soldiers, your weapons and everything else in a battlefield. In a company context, it's about the portfolio of businesses you're trying to operate, where you deploy your people to maximize kind of revenue, how you think about balancing the different types of businesses that you have, how you allocate resources, both monetary and people, against those, and how you also sort of think about prioritizing, investing, buying, selling kind of aspects across all of that. There's a third piece which is much more focused on execution, which is about driving innovation, incubating, sort of exploring new ideas, how you actually start to implement new things at a cross-organizational level. Now, the relatively strength of these kind of show the focus. Strategy can mean many different things for different types of organizations, but they're kind of relatively consistent and common. I would sort of define this a little bit more broadly, where the role of the strategy officer and the strategy officer is really to help the company to plan, navigate, and capitalize on future opportunities. And particularly how you navigate, I guess, change, disruption, and marketplaces that evolve over time. So it's taking a longer term view of where things are going and trying to work out how we kind of best sort of navigate and succeed in a changing kind of environment. Now, typically that means looking at strategic plans to work out how we do that, looking at how we identify areas of growth and key initiatives that we should be focusing on, and how you, I guess, drive innovation, particularly around an existing business. How do you continue to innovate something that we've been doing for a long time to make sure we're relevant? Very typically and practically, that means monitoring kind of long-term trends, outlooks, gathering intelligence on competitors, what other companies are doing kind of in the market, looking at different opportunities that we could sort of approach in terms of driving growth, how you actually build plans for those, how you work across the company and different parts of the organization, different kind of focuses to sort of align on kind of new opportunities and new initiatives, driving innovation, incubating kind of new ideas, and increasingly sort of trying to look at what are the big deals, what are the big merger opportunities or other things that could be sort of aligned to help execute a lot of that. So it's kind of more or less at a high level what typically a strategy office does. The first real question we should ask is why IPONWEB actually needs a strategy office and a strategy function. And I'll come back to the military analogy a little bit in that our ad industry and the industry we play in is very much a war zone. There's a lot that's taking place. It's very disrupted. There's a lot of very big players. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of change. And I think how we navigate that is kind of very relevant and is very similar to taking the military interpretation of what strategy is and how that kind of operates. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I think as everyone knows, we kind of work in an industry where change is incredibly rapid and there's a lot of disruption that's taking place across the industries that we work at a global level and within the kind of the verticals in the business we're focusing on. And increasingly we find ourselves in a market which is very, very competitive, and a lot of other ad tech companies that we work with and that we partner with are struggling to kind of survive. Ad tech margins are under pressure as the industry kind of matures and consolidates. Pricing kind of is under a lot of pressure, and a lot of companies are, I guess, shrinking and having to be more competitive on smaller margins that they're kind of operating on. We're also finding that increasingly everyone is trying to disintermediate everyone else, and the industry programmatic that we operate in has kind of grown very quickly. It's hit a matured kind of phase. The amount of money and margin is now under pressure, and everyone's trying to work out how they get a bigger piece of that kind of margin. And that means most of those companies are trying to cut out other companies to go more direct, to consolidate more margin for themselves. Their growth strategies are more about how you consolidate other parts of the business in order to get a greater share. And I think we see this day to day, particularly on the bid switch front, where you're right in the middle and everyone's trying to disintermediate us. But I think we also see it on our platform side, where all of our clients and their strategies are having to work out how they kind of move forward, who they disintermediate, how they kind of grow their business, how they extend margin as well. We're also seeing an environment where it's getting harder and harder to raise money. And it's also, there's no VC money now to prop up unprofitable business models. So companies that can be profitable sort of gain all the advantage because they have the capital to sort of fund and kind of expand. And that means, I guess, the fight for survival becomes a lot more real. When everyone's struggling to sort of be profitable and or to kind of survive, they can't raise money like they normally do kind of in the markets. You have to be very aggressive in terms of kind of your approaches. And we're sort of in that market where these are now a reality for us in the ad tech kind of space. The second thing that's going on is we're sort of seeing a lot of enterprise consolidation. We're also seeing a lot of standardization and regulation that comes with the market and the industry that we're operating starting to mature. And you see that in, I guess, Google and Facebook and Amazon increasingly stealing more and more ad dollars as the big guys start to win. Everyone else is starting to fight for smaller pieces of the pie. We're seeing big enterprise companies, particularly the telcos, start to actually consolidate and buy big chunks of the industry so that they can compete. AT&T is a very good example of that with the acquisition of AppNexus. We've seen Verizon start to do that by rolling up Yahoo and quite a lot of other competitors. And if you look at our industry, more and more big players are consolidating quite a number of the smaller players. And so the industry is somewhat shrinking, but you're getting big, more powerful kind of figures try to compete with each other. And we're seeing these new entrants like the TV companies and the telcos start to come in more aggressively to sort of get their seat at the table as programmatic kind of expands as well. We're also seeing what I call MarTech players start to get a lot more aggressive in our space as well. So increasingly, the companies like the Oracles, the Adobes, the guys that traditionally have had very strong sort of marketing-related businesses are now starting to enter our space, starting to buy up quite a lot of companies as well. And sort of moving forward, we expect them to start consolidating DSPs and start consolidating into the buy side. We're also seeing, as an industry matures, if you will, becomes big, it hits regulation and standardization. So we're seeing a wave starting to come through that's impacted us in a whole range of ways across the company, where large regulatory shifts sort of have transformative effects across the industry. We've seen this recently with our ability to build platforms for very large players, us now needing ISO type certifications, which we finally just kind of got through that process. We've seen similar things now with tag and anti-fraud kind of programs and sort of certifications where you have to sort of standardize and be regulated, I guess, by key components of the industry. We're seeing that in Europe with GDPR and privacy kind of protection. A number of these things keep kind of happening, which are signs of the industry, A, maturing, but if you're not prepared, planning, really understanding the implications of some of these sort of regulatory shifts, you can get left behind, or we can be playing catch up, but not be in front of kind of some of the opportunities that those regulatory shifts kind of create. And we have some similar things taking place with the standardization of some technologies as well. So a good couple of examples of that were, say, header bidding, where we an innovation came through that swept across the industry. If you didn't really understand where header bidding was going, you kind of got left out. And it's a good historical example that sort of explains the role of strategy. So if you go back 2 years, not many of us thought header bidding would really kind of succeed. what happened is the companies that didn't implement and adopt that quickly, like Rubicon, got left behind by the index exchanges and all the other guys that did. We've seen something similar happen with ads text. Weren't sure whether it gets adopted. Big guys kind of drive that through, and if you don't have that strategy kind of sorted out, you're in a difficult place to be able to move your business. And that limitation is something that BidSwitch kind of has been caught in for the last 6 to 9 months as we try to sort of evolve different business models. Now, a lot of these, there's many more, and I could do a 1-hour presentation potentially on sort of the implications of the battlefields that we're sort of operating in. But for IPONWeb as a business, our traditional kind of businesses, as a custom platform business and a BidSwitch infrastructure business, are under a lot of pressure to succeed. And how we can actually continue to really drive the growth we've been enjoying historically is going to be a real challenge. We have to be a lot smarter about what we're doing. We have to really plan kind of where we're trying to be and be much more organised if we need to be successful. So the point being, we need a longer term focus as a company. I think we've kind of enjoyed sort of a lot of our growth by solving problems for clients, fixing problems in the industry as the industry is growing. As the industry stops growing, you have to be much more strategic and focus longer term on how you're trying to be going to succeed. So historically, I think we are often very tactical, very reactive to what our clients want, what the industry says. But we kind of need the ability to actually start thinking out longer term, how are we going to get there? What do we need to do? How do we align all the things that we're doing in order to get maximum synergy and success? And that has implications on a range of things. That's taking better advantage of new opportunities in terms of innovations and changes that happen, and things like header bidding. How can we sit down and think through where that might be in 2 or 3 years and make sure we make the right decisions when these things kind of come up in the future? It's trying to think through a lot of the consolidation or the disruption or the disintermediation that's starting to happen. How do we navigate that? How do we make sure that we're relevant in 2 years' time when a lot of these changes start to fall out? It's helping identify new areas for revenue growth. So in the next 3 to 5 years, we want to find, another 50 million in revenue. Is that really going to come from the business we're operating today? Or do we have to start thinking about new business areas we need to be investing in that will actually be able to power that growth through the next stage of company development? And it's trying to ensure that we remain relevant and well positioned to potential future buyers of the company or future investors, or even sort of shareholders if we decide to IPO or something like that. It's about understanding where the market is going to be and how do we make sure that when people think about IPONWeb, they don't think about us as a company that was kind of a bit out of date but had a good business, but actually we're relevant, we're kind of sort of navigating the future, and they believe in the growth and trajectory that we're on. And I think the final part, which is quite important, is also trying to work out what are the strategic partnerships and tie-ups and even potentially M&A opportunities that sort of feed from that would help position us to succeed. So that's kind of why I think the mandate of the strategy office is to start thinking through a lot of those questions. What we're sort of aiming to do with the strategy office is to start focusing on 4 key things. And the first of those is intelligence. Starting to work out how we build up a capability within the company that's doing a lot of competitive analysis, sort of building strategic insights, research on where the market's going, helping us, I guess, get the information we need to make better decisions about the organisation, the businesses we're investing in, and where we think key shifts are going to happen. The second area is to try and help prioritisation. We have lots of product opportunities and ideas across this company. I've never worked for a company that's had more potential sort of sitting around the organisation than this one. We kind of touch so many types of businesses, different types of clients, different types of segments. But we need to work out how we better prioritise where we're sort of focusing our investments. we can't do everything. How do we sort of start to say, okay, this is where we can really make money, let's align all our resources there. So getting into that process of really trying to think longer term, how do we start prioritising what we're spending time on? The key and probably most important bit is starting to sit down and develop, I guess, actionable business plans that includes financial and or investments sort of benchmarks longer term for if we are embarking on something, how much money do we think it will make? What is the 5-term return on that? How much will it actually cost us? What are the key goals, benchmarks, milestones that it's going to take to be successful? And getting into more of a planning kind of process around starting to think about some of the new things that we can do. And I think 4 is working out strategically, are there key deals, partnerships, and other factors independent of kind of sales opportunities that we can be doing that will sort of accelerate our ability to sort of exceed in some of these areas. So that's, again, very, very high level, but what kind of the strategy office is trying to focus on. It's probably important to explain what it doesn't do. It's not about trying to set the vision. I think strategy is really about trying to execute the goals of the company. And very much it's working closely with Boris to understand his vision of where he's trying to take things and then providing a lot of strategy and options to decide how we're going to get there. And working very collaboratively to sort of make sure that's aligned and able to actually flow through into what we're trying to do. It's also about not taking ownership of something. Quite often, and I've been Chief Strategy Officer for 3 years and never really done anything with it. The reason was I was kind of running BidSwitch, and you get caught up in the day-to-day, you get caught up in the tactical, you get caught up in what you've got to do next week or next month in order to sort of make the business kind of move forward. And it's quite important to remove ownership in the sense that you can work across sort of everything without being kind of stuck in one particular kind of piece, if that makes sense. So not particularly owning a particular part of the revenue or the P&L or the business sort of gives you the ability to work more flexibly across the whole company and be more neutral in terms of how you collaborate kind of with everyone and every part of the business. Similar kind of aspect to that is our business can sometimes get very tactical. You can get caught up in sort of the key move you've got to make this week to respond or to win the kind of business. So it's trying to take a step back, not get caught up in that. Think about 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. What are the things that move the needle? How do you sort of align more closely with that? And it's not trying to drive an agenda for R&D and technology. We have great ability to kind of drive innovation within the company. It's not trying to sort of dictate that. It's trying to actually understand what we can do and then think about how we can actually kind of build better monetization application sort of return on investments for those assets that have been created. Very simply, you can Google hundreds of these things, but I'm 2 weeks in and I haven't got my own process kind of evolved yet, so I've just took a very standardized one just to explain somewhat what's involved in the strategic development kind of process. I think the concept is kind of, stands true. I think it's starting with doing a lot of analysis of the market, understanding kind of what's out there, what we're doing, what's going on today, how we're positioned, what our competitors are doing. It's trying to then think further out 2 to 5 years, where do we think those things will be? What we see happening now, what possibly could actually sort of that evolve into, and get some kind of view on possible directions or scenarios for where things will be further out. It's then sitting down, working across the organisation to understand, okay, what are all the implications of something that we might be trying to do? How does that affect markets? What do we need to do in terms of the customers? Who are we trying to go after? From a product standpoint, what would we need to be able to execute something? Financially, what does that look like? Who are the competitors? What are the technologies we're going to need to be successful? And then being able to actually put together sets of options that gives us flexibility to say, okay, we could do this, we can do that, we can do this. And in any scenario, there's never one possible strategy. There's usually a multiple. But it's trying to be able to derive what are the 2 or 3 things that are our best options. How do we make a better decision on which one to go for? And there's a final piece, which is obviously understanding how we're executing, and can we revisit that? Strategies don't stand still, business plans don't stand still, they need to be evolved and constantly iterated on and changed. So I think what's important about kind of this process is that the strategy office, the intention is to lead that process. The reality is most of that work, a lot of that insight, a lot of that understanding of the business today, the customers, the technology, what's required to actually support or operate these things comes from the people in this room and across the organisation. So in many ways, sort of my goal is to work out how to leverage that knowledge in a structured process and format and sort of gain a lot of the insight from the people in this room and in this company to help sort of make those better decisions. So it's a lot of, project managing, but trying to actually work out how we pull the right information together and make the most use of that. So what are we planning to working on? Very broadly, there's two main areas of focus, which I've already somewhat touched on. The first is, what are the areas of growth for us as a company? And these are really new plays, new products, new market opportunities, or new things the company can start to focus on that will drive longer term growth for us. And there's 4 or 5 that we kind of need to sit down and sort of work through exactly what our strategy is going to be and how we sort of approach that. The first is sitting down thinking about how do we start working more directly with publishers, how do we start offering scaled offerings to agencies. And you'll hear sort of mention of the grid. If you haven't heard about it already, you'll probably hear more about that over the coming months. But starting to look at, can we extend what we've done with BidSwitch and sort of scale an opportunity that's more direct with publishers and agencies. And very importantly, the two are very codependent and they cross over. So we're in the very early stages of trying to actually define a new strategy for how we start to work and engage with publishers and agencies. I don't want to go into the details here. I think we're still in the process of answering a lot of those questions. And when we kind of have sort of a clear strategy articulated kind of in the coming weeks, we'll start to outline and kind of share detail with you in a more relevant way. I think we have a similar question marks with television, where we've been doing a lot of great projects. We've got a lot of knowledge and insights into kind of the industry. We've got some disparate things that we're kind of working on. The question really is, where is TV really going to go, and how do we make a bigger play into that space? And so there's a more open question with TV on longer term, do we have a big play here that can really drive a lot of growth for the company? I think increasingly we feel there's an opportunity with direct to advertiser. There's a lot of performance advertising and great work that we've done with kind of Mediaforce and some other clients to start to understand our ability to drive performance marketing programs for advertisers directly. Do we pivot that into a platform, make our own play? Is it an offering that gets packaged up to clients? There's a whole range of different options that we have in terms of how we can best utilize that. So there's another project that potentially sort of sits in that space as well. We also have a range of other sort of things sitting around. We have BidSwitch data, we have curated feeds, we have a range of other initiatives that we've piloted, got off the ground, haven't really executed, that need to be revisited and sit down and thought through how we continue to sort of grow and execute those. And that will continue to evolve. In 6 months, there'll be a different list that we need to sort of prioritize and sort of value as we get more feedback and things move forward. The second area is more complex in some senses, but also more straightforward. There's a lot of things that happen across the industry, and GDPR and ads text are two good examples that continue to evolve, where there are new innovations, regulatory events, things that start to happen that the industry is adopting that we need to sit down and put some focus on to understand what the implications are for us. And I've listed a few of these. They're not really business plays, they're more things that are going on that we need to really understand. And ID consortiums is a good example of that. There's a lot of different ID consortiums. Do we have a play? What are we doing? How should we respond? MarTech consolidation, I kind of mentioned if the big MarTech players start buying up DSPs very quickly, where does that leave us? What's our play? How should we think about what's going to happen there? Blockchain, is it all hype? Are there real applications that might emerge next year, 2 years, that if we're not on top of now, we could just get completely left out? And I think we're already starting to see some of those things rear their head on BidSwitch, and we need to sort of be more kind of in front of that. There's other interesting opportunities starting to emerge in terms of how people treat audiences and measure that as kind of a commodity that could actually have big implications for us as well. So not only is it about launching new business, it's also about starting to get an insight of where the market might be going and some of these things that could have big implications for what we're trying to do. So what does that mean for you? I mean, remembering I'm just one person today, what I want you to think about is how you should try to engage with a strategy office. And I think that means a number of things. That's if you see some interesting things, research, market insights, data on something that's going on that you think is quite important, please share. You guys are a lot closer to the business than I am. You can actually see competitive moves and other things sometimes that are very helpful to understand and kind of can trigger a lot of this. I know historically that's kind of been one of our biggest sources of insight. So please reach out when those things sort of, you come across them. If there's a new product opportunity or you see a new market niche and you think that's interesting, let us know. Happy to sort of help prioritize or shape some sort of thinking about how we should be sort of looking at it. We have a lot of technical capabilities, we have a lot of products. How you actually go about commercializing them, what that looks like is another key area. So when we do have something that we think is interesting and then need to think about, okay, how do we potentially commercialize it, please reach out. And again, any associated plans or other things that we can provide sort of valuable insight into, please feel free to talk to me. As I said, the reality is it's a one-man band right now. So it will take a few months to sort of, I guess work out how we're going to manage these things and fulfill a lot of processes. I'm only a couple of weeks in, so we will build a bit more capability and ability to actually support a lot more needs, but it will take some time, so please be patient. That's it. Any questions?
Scott, you mentioned M&A a couple times on the board. Would we more likely be an acquirer or be an acquisition target?
I don't know. I mean, we've had companies, which I'm sure Boris will answer questions on, interested in acquiring us at various points in time. That's a huge tax on the organisation because you have to deal with all sorts of investigations, preparing strategies, business plans, financials. So, we're always going to sort of entertain those kind of conversations just to understand how real they are and valuable, but it does take a lot of time, kind of energy. I think acquiring companies is an option. We've done one in Eternity with Workflow, but they can also, paralyze an organisation and quite often fail. So I think both strategies both are important if they're executed against a particular strategy and help us achieve a goal. So being acquired, if it helps us, achieve kind of a bigger dream and realisation or make, Boris kind of happy is definitely on the table. Acquiring companies makes sense if we really need to enter a market and we're missing kind of a capability. Right now, it's not primary focus. I put it there just because it's, potential. It may well happen. So, yeah.
Scott, do you recognize evangelism as a part of your strategy of these functions?
Can you repeat the first part?
Evangelism.
Evangelism?
Yeah.
No. What do you want me to evangelize?
In some sense to push market in some directions that we would like to suggest them?
I think that's a function of marketing, I think. So, if we do have a strategy or a business that we're trying to launch and we need to move the market or educate those things, then I think that's a process of sitting down with marketing and working out what's required to do that. I don't think that's necessarily a function of the strategy office, but we'll probably play a collaborative role in that, I would think.
You mentioned the focus on market innovation. What time period generally does a strategist look at this over, and how do you weigh the different points? You mentioned header bidding. 3 years ago, if you didn't get on that, you missed the boat and it really impacted you. But now, 3 years later, 3.5 years later, we see a lot of consolidation you mentioned was brought about, and mistrust was brought about by header bidding. So how do you weigh those things out?
Header bidding I raise as an example just because I think 3 years ago we went down the path of holistic ad serving. We sort of looked at header bidding and said, well, that doesn't really make sense, right? Now, you're never going to get it 100% right, but maybe, if we had that time again, would we sit down and say, okay, we can see this sort of view, should we just investigate it in a lot more detail? And, I think we did at the time, so it's not a criticism at all. The point is, we don't want to make quick decisions, so if we can actually, we feel this is important and we prioritize it because of the implications it might have, then, we do want to spend time really understanding kind of potentially where it could go and understand our risk, right? So, we didn't have a big risk with header bidding so much, but if we were an SSP and we just dismissed it out of hand without doing an investigation, we'd be dead, right? So, and a lot of companies did. So I think the point is more, how do we put a process in so that we can manage our risk by not just ignoring things that actually could be really important without actually trying to take some time to sort of work through that. But you're kind of right in that these things will keep innovating, and header bidding is not necessarily the 100% answer, and it's got several iterations probably to go. So it's a continuous process in that regard, I think.
Kind of previous question, but there is a saying that to be ready for the future, you need to shape one. So how do you assess chances of open web to shape some future?
It's a pretty tough question, to be honest. Listen, we did it once with BidSwitch. There was no category for that kind of business, and we went out and kind of made one and built a business solving a problem where no one else had taken that on. So, I'm not saying, we built a Google-esque kind of business off that, but we did sort of, in some senses, move the industry and change a perception that actually you didn't need to connect directly, there was an alternative. It's a much more complex situation than that, I do appreciate, but we do have the potential to do that, I think. I think the challenge we operate now in, the stakes are much higher, there's a lot more bigger companies involved, it's actually really hard to shape the market. Our opportunity is probably to be sort of faster, smarter, and maybe go after smaller pockets rather than trying to make big innovations in kind of waves. So sometimes it's smarter to piggyback on the big guys doing something, but you execute sort of in particular markets that they're not covering. And it could be the case in, say TV, for example, that rather going after the very big TV guys, you go after a second tier that don't have the technology and can't innovate. And we've got a good history at servicing that part of the market as opposed to trying to compete with the really big guys head to head. So I think there are opportunities in there, but
and
yeah.
Regarding the pace of change, I remember the presentation you gave for BidSwitch in the beginning of this year, and it was largely the same talk about going to publishers, to agencies, like Web Speed Up, etc. And so we see a continuation of these ideas now. And question is, how fast we were to reach to those ideas for the past period?
I think what's changed between sort of even 12 months ago and now, we were trying to see if we could do that out of BidSwitch, and I think that just proved too hard. Every time we tried to do something, we sort of got blocked by key parts of the industry, and we set BidSwitch up as something that solved a very specific problem, not building monetization engines and doing other kind of things. So it was quite difficult for us to actually try pivot, and quite a lot of our partners don't really want us to do that. So I think part of the challenge has been trying to drive that within something like BidSwitch that has a very fixed kind of role was difficult. I think part of what we're trying to think about is, can we take a slightly more broader view and approach to doing that by potentially approaching that same problem slightly differently, and gives us the ability to actually work faster, more independently, but in parallel, rather than trying to change a business which has a very fixed kind of role. And there's a lot of issues with trying to actually change, I guess, that perception and kind of role for a lot of partners as well. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of,
Last
yeah.
one, how are you going to scale? What's your plans for scaling the strategy office? One man?
yeah, listen, the strategy office should never be huge. It's not like it's going to be a 30, 40, 50 person team. So, you know, it needs to be a small team, but it will be a set of projects that we're kind of managing through. So I don't know, honestly. The first strategy I've probably got to do is for the strategy office and come up with a business plan. But the first steps will just, you know, it'll be a small team to give us the ability to actually do what we need to do. And then, you know, Boris will decide if that adds value and give me more resources if we need to accelerate some things from there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Tracy?
Scott, you mentioned that the outside mandate of the strategy office was the vision. Can you give us an insight on how much progress you've made for us in terms of getting that direction of vision that then empowers the strategy office to move forward?
You can ask Boris that question on Thursday, probably. I have this daily debate with Boris as well, so probably the reality is that we're having a daily debate, which is a good thing. So I think we're sort of, it's a discussion and it evolves. I think, you know, we'll sort of work towards that. I think a lot of the big things we're starting to do really clarifies, well, ask the question of why we're trying to do it and what we're trying to achieve by doing it, which I think, you know, is directly related to what the vision is for the business. So, you know, I think that's an ongoing discussion, and you can, Boris can give his answer to that on Thursday.
Well, it's fascinating, because for those that would be interested in engagement survey results, it was the biggest area of opportunity for us to move forward and improve satisfaction levels was on that particular issue about vision.
Yeah.
It kind of dovetails nicely into
Yeah. Boris won't like it as well, but listen, I can give him a strategy for how to be a company this big or how to be a company this big. I can give him a strategy for how to be successful in 15 years or how to be successful in 3 years. So, you know, strategies are variable depending on what you're trying to achieve. And, you know, obviously before we can really decide what we're doing, we need to be aligned on where we're going. So I think it's an important part of the process. Yeah. Cool.
Other questions for Scott? Anything else for Scott?
Alrighty, thanks everyone.
Great.